My name is Mzili Mujunga. I'm a Ugandan artist. I'm a painter, sculptor, printmaker. I've been working in Kampala for almost 25 years. I was born and raised in Uganda. I grew up in the suburbs of Kampala during the 80s. Incidentally, I followed my older brother into the art world. When I was still a student in secondary school, my brother was at the Margaret Troll School of Industrial and Fine Art, and I would go there to help him hang his work, and then I got very inspired. But even prior to that, my older bro used to make some very good drawings with another friend of his. And they used to make very good drawings, and I was always in awe, in admiration of my brother's art. And he was such a wonderful drawer. So I literally discovered that recently, that all along I have been following in his footsteps. And yet he never got to practice. He never got to practice art. I joined Makerere University in 1992. And when I got there, I found Professor Nagenda, Professor Sengendo, Professor Serulio, Ignatius Serulio. There was Dr. Iga. All of these were very, very inspiring people, because for them they had come from an era of art that was directly related with Margaret Troll at the School of Fine Art. And Margaret Troll was the founder of that school. And so these people had interfaced with that great educator, and then they passed on that information to us. When I joined campus, I was doing graphics, painting, and sculpture, and a bit of art history. My stay at the school was a very, very busy one. I spent most of my time in the studio working. I barely had time for other extracurricular activities at campus. And as you know, campus life is always very boisterous at night, but I just didn't have that time. I decided to major in sculpture, and it was so demanding. We had to do a lot of carving, and there was a lot of drawing, and there's a lot of research. We would go to the neighborhood ghetto. So we used to have these very interesting lessons at campus, where we would actually go out and do some observational drawing in actual environments. Like, we would go into the slum and we interact with the people, and we make drawings, sketches, take some photographs, and then use that as a resource for our art. I think this was very good training, because it gave me that ability to get information from my immediate environment to make my art. We also had experiences where Dr. Serulio would slaughter a goat, and then, we would first of all draw the goat when it's alive. Then he would slaughter it. We would help also to slaughter the goat, and then afterwards we keep drawing and drawing until we reached a point where we roasted the meat and ate it, and then again we were drawing and taking photographs. So creating this kind of resource was so inspiring for me, especially as an artist. I eventually graduated in 96, and then I started working. I did not go straight into art. I was working as an events organizer with Shaka Mayanja. We were bringing musicians from around the world, international musicians, into Kampala and doing shows. I remember we brought Buju Banton, the Jamaican singer. We brought Aswad, Third World, all these reggae groups. And I was enjoying that so much until I got an incident where I was actually going to go to jail. Then I said, no, I can't go to jail. I'm not going to do this. Let me go back to what actually I trained to do. And that is the night when I decided to go back to art. And I opened a studio in Nakulabye with a friend of mine, Victor, an artist. I did sculptures for Silver Springs. It's a hotel in Kampala. I did some sculptures at campus for Complex Hall, which is one of the halls at campus. I was commissioned to do some work in Mulago with Dr. Rose Chirumira. So during that time, I was really very active as a sculptor and less as a painter until 1998, 98, we had a show at, there was this German lady called Maria Fischer. She had a gallery called Tulifanya, and it was in town, and she invited us young artists to do a show called Discovery. This is a show where she would discover young artists. And so I was invited last minute to take part in the show. I presented some work, and during the show my work did very well, and the lady was excited about it, and to a point where she offered me a solo exhibition the following year in '99. So in '99 I did my first solo exhibition, and it was such a great time for me as a young man struggling to be able to make some good money out of my art. That was very inspiring for me. It made me leave everything else, and I just focused on art until I decided to go back for my postgraduate diploma in education. In 2001, I got an opportunity that actually changed my life as an artist. I got a chance to go to Chuo cha Sanaa in Bagamoyo to participate in a performance art workshop with a group from Netherlands, Wana and Consorten. They were a performing art group. I went there. We were 3 Ugandan artists who participated, the late Dan Sekweyama and Barbara Rwanga, who is now in the US. So we went and joined people from Tanzania and other people from Kenya. And we had this 1 month of amazing experience, just creating art. And the reason why I said this was life-changing for me is because I had been more or less working with plastic art. I was working with sculpture and painting. And these people were actually working with themselves, with their bodies, because they were doing performance art or visual theater. So we got to interact with dancers, we got to interact with actors, and then we did a lot of creative stuff. And it was almost like crazy. You know, you do this art form where you feel actually like you're crazy when you're doing it, because it was so different from what I knew. And it was such a great experience. It was there in Tanzania that actually the group that was there with me decided to create a regional association called Index Mashariki, which is Indigenous Expressionist. And we created it with these colleagues of mine with the hope of uniting ourselves into a force actually that could influence East Africa. I must say the Ugandan chapter was very active because we had people like Sane, Enoch Muchibi, the son of the late Mugalula Muchibi. We had Ronex Ahimbisibwe, Kiki Mwesigwa, myself, the late Achola Odido. We were very, very active. We reached a point where we were even getting support from the Netherlands. We had a trainer, someone who was training us. It was called Dr. Gerard Kosa, and he was training us as entrepreneurs in art. He was teaching us how to organize our portfolios, how to present our work, and how to market our work internationally. And this was amazing. And then during this time again, Index Mashariki organized workshops in Nairobi. We had a workshop, a printmakers workshop in Nairobi, where we trained young street artists at Kuona Trust at the Museum of Nairobi. And we trained them in printmaking. I was training them in my technique, which involved printmaking from dark to light. And Fred Mutebi was training these young people in his technique of light to dark. And we had a wonderful month of training where we got results, and eventually we influenced artists like Peterson Kamwathi, Mngene Mwaura, Michael Soi, Patrick Mukabi. They came around and they were interfacing with our techniques, and we had a lot of creative outbursts. We did a show in Nairobi. It was one of the first significant printmakers shows in Nairobi, and that was really a good outcome of Index Mashariki. In 2004, I won a scholarship for the Royal Overseas League, and I became a Royal Overseas League scholar, where I got the opportunity to have a residence in the UK, and also to show my art in a group exhibition in the UK. I was there for a month. Hospitalfield is a place somewhere in Scotland. That's where the residence was, and I was interacting with artists from New Zealand and Hong Kong, and also UK. And we did this residence, and then we were able to dine and wine with the rich people in London. But apart from that, really, I was not inspired. And I tried to approach galleries in London, but I guess at that stage of my career, my work was still very amateur, and I was just starting out, and most of them were really not interested. So I came back to Uganda, a bit of a disgruntled man. But then I got another opportunity to go to Germany, again in a residence, and do produce some work there. I was offered to go to Schwandorf in Bavaria, where I worked at the Künstler House. They have a big art house there. So I was there with Eria and Subuga Sane. We were there together, and we produced a lot of work. We did a lot of tour of Bavaria, and interacted with a lot of people. I got ideas. I remember back then I was pushing my idea of the talisman. There are these little backcloth objects that I was stitching and then putting them on canvas as an art form, and it was such a great experience for me in Germany. When I came back from Germany, I immediately dived back into my activities with Index Mashariki. We were able to link with the Pan-African Circle of Artists that had been created in Nigeria, and we participated in a tour, a study tour called Overcoming Maps. And this tour was probably the most exciting foreign experience I ever had, because I had the opportunity to travel through like 5 countries, West African countries, in 1 month, and experiencing and holding roundtable discussions with artists from all these countries. So we would travel by bus. We traveled from Lagos into Togo, and we went to Benin, and we went to Burkina Faso, we went to Mali, then we came back to Ghana, and in each of these places we were holding discussions about art, contemporary African art. And one of the main things that we were pushing for was how to get governments in those countries to facilitate and get involved in the promotion of art and artists I was impressed by what I saw in Burkina Faso, because for them they had a whole infrastructure that was supporting artists and artisans, and they had a ministry that was actively involved in these activities, which I didn't see elsewhere. One of the things that we were trying to emphasize when we met the interior ministers, because we went and met interior ministers, was to find out how to interest them in making it easier for artists to cross borders, to look into issues of visas, so that it could make travel around Africa easier for artists and probably for the general public. And so this was a very, very productive encounter, because I remember we also delved into the issue of publication. We decided to write our own stories. Prior to this, most of the publications that had been done on art in Africa were done mainly by foreign writers, and there was little content that was coming off the continent from the artist's perspective. So we did a lot of writing, and that's where I picked some writing skills to present myself, as an artist, and to write about my art. And we encouraged other artists to do the same. And this was prior to the social media and the internet craze that you see today. So most of the stuff was written, in books. And I got to meet very interesting and powerful artists, Dr. Kritz Ikwemesi, Dr. Ugochukwu Nzewi, Nwafo, all these very interesting artists and art educators. I got to interact with them during my stint with Parker. And I brought the idea back to Uganda. We did actually an East African tour, which went through Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania. And we tried to push it, but then we were constrained by funds, because we were not able to get the support that we needed to continue with that activity, except online. So we ended up going online to do all this. And when I came back, I did a wonderful show, Sahel Bus, where I was documenting my trip around the Sahel, and I did it at Alliance Francaise, and it was a success. Back in the day, things were not so easy. It was not easy to live as an artist. You could not easily live off what you earned as an artist. So I had to go back and do the teaching diploma, postgraduate diploma, so that I could get a position as a teacher. And I started off humbly in a small school somewhere in Kasubi. It was like a community school where I was staying and working. And afterwards, I shifted eventually to better schools. I got an invitation to teach in an international school, Rainbow International School. And at first I thought it was just something I'm going to do for 1, 2, 3 years, and I quit. But I ended up working for that school for 10 years. But during that time, I was also working actively as an art leader, because I became the vice chairperson of Uganda Artists Association. I was also at one point the president of the Uganda Printmakers Association, and I also initiated a street art festival called Laba Street Art Festival during that same time. So I was very active with the art community, trying to provide leadership as well as teaching. I also continued to make shows, to have solo exhibitions every year during the 10 years that I was at Rainbow. The last show that I did when I was still teaching at Rainbow was Buffalo Woman. Now, Buffalo Woman to me is also a very important exhibition, because prior to that, most of my work was very abstract. But then I wanted to actually experiment with representative art, with figurative art. I was so inspired by a string of magazines called African Woman that was running at that time in Kampala. And I used to see all these pictures of the social life. It was like the social media of then. I would go through it and see lots of beautiful images of all these models and socialites. And I used this to create work that was talking about gender. For a long time, my major theme has always been a spiritual sexual theme, but with emphasis on gender. I've always had an opinion on gender issues, right from affirmative action to issues of human sexuality. I've always been very, very keen in this sector. And so that show, Buffalo Woman, was a starting point for that conversation. But I also did other exhibitions subsequently. After leaving, I did Head, and then I also did Crowd Control. These were exhibitions that I was doing with AfriArt Gallery, a gallery with whom I've had partnership for almost my entire career as an artist. Because one of the reasons why I had this long relationship with AfriArt Gallery is because when we were setting out, Daudi and I were trying to create an effort to grow the industry, the art industry in Kampala. So one of the things that Daudi held was the issue of a gallery, because we only had one foreign-owned gallery back in the day. So Daudi started this gallery. Then we joined efforts and we started a magazine, Start Journal, which now is online. We were also trying to push for a museum, and we still are, but this is something that has been taking long in the making. We were trying to grow something. There's a lot of information that we learned as young artists that I would pick from maybe, say, West Africa or wherever I traveled, and then I would pass it on to Daudi concerning proper gallery practice, until we reached a point where the thing became very self-sustaining, and it was even capable of handling international transactions. So I have been working with AfriArt for a long time as an artist and also as an advisor to my brother Daudi. We did these shows. My last show was Crowd Control, I think, as an exhibition. But then it was at this time actually that I started venturing into selling art internationally through art fairs. So when this started, I was not able to produce enough work. There was a lot of demand to a point that I could not catch up. I failed to accumulate enough work for a show during that period, because most of the work that I was making was always being taken away. The one thing I know about myself is that I am a studio artist. I've always done things alone. Like I'm not a very good person with groups or group activities. When I was starting out, I was interacting with all these artists, and maybe because of my leadership, the need for leadership, I did not want to be a leader in the art world. I did not, because I always shunned that kind of responsibility. But it was thrust upon us to lead, because we were seeing this vacuum, and there was no one to help us grow as a collective. So I interacted with other artists on that basis, the basis of leadership, not on the basis of creating work, because I know that creating art comes from an individual. It's a personal thing, but at least I could interface with artists to organize them in their practice. So I used to visit other artists' studios and give advice. I interacted with artists like Edson Mugalu, Juko Hood, Ismail Katerega, all these young artists who were younger than me, back then. I interacted with them, trying to create some kind of synergy. Eventually, as I withdrew into my studio further and further, I decided to have at least one activity a year that actually helps me to carry on with this work of nurturing and mentoring young artists. So we created Surfaces in AfriArt, and Surfaces is just a workshop for young artists that helps to mentor and to orientate them into a particular direction. In this mentorship program, we've been able to get some good fruits. People like Sungi Mlengea have come out of this directly. People like Richard Atgonza have come out of this. And there are other artists who have actually thrived. They are now practicing very, very, effectively because of this effort. Over the years, we as visual artists have made progress in one key area, that is in the quality of our work. That this used to be a very big concern for us. The standard was very, very weak back then. The kind of materials we were using were improvised, and I remember when I was setting out, I did some art pieces that actually disintegrated before the show, simply because I didn't know how to handle materials. So over the years, artists have learned how to handle materials competently, and the quality of work, the content, the scope is so rich to a point where we are now able to compete internationally as artists, as visual artists. We've also been able to achieve a pavilion at the Venice Biennale, which is something that we always dreamt about. We have been able to participate in shows like Basel, These used to be no-go areas for African artists, but Ugandan artists have done this, and I think this is very, very optimistic. It's pointing towards a very bright future for the visual arts. However, one of the things that I would want to see happen is increased government involvement in supporting the arts. The Uganda government is starting initiatives. Like right now, it's working with the musicians through their federation, and it's beginning to even fund them directly. I hope that this will also happen for the visual artists, so that we can also get this kind of emolument, this kind of support from the government, because being an artist is not a very lucrative enterprise. It is more like a priesthood. You sacrifice your life to work for the good of humanity. So we should be supported by the government. If government becomes actively involved in the visual arts, we can actually achieve our dreams of having a national collection, having our own museums, Museum of Contemporary Art, or archives of art for the country. These are areas where it's very hard for individual artists to handle and to improve. But with government participation, we can achieve this. I think to sum it all, the future is very bright. The future is blindingly bright for Africa and for Ugandan artists. And the sky is never the limit.